engage in that line of production. Okay? They will reject all those lines of production in which they believe that it's going to cost them more to produce the good than they can receive in revenue. Okay? And that's not only good for them because they earn profits when they act that way and avoid losses. It's good for you and I. Because what they're doing is that they're taking lower valued resources and using them in higher valued uses. That is, resources are being used or being wasted before they step in and say, you know what, there's a better use for this steel and this labor and so on, instead of making large automobiles and trucks. Now, one thing that Mises did say was the following. He pointed out that it is possible with a small, simple economy to operate without economic calculation. So he made a distinction. He said there's a difference between valuation and calculation. Valuation is what we do every day when we decide, for example, that we're going to make ourselves a ham sandwich instead of a tuna sandwich. When we're not in the market, we're simply comparing what we would like better. So we use our bread and our labor and so on to make the ham sandwich, because that's higher on our value scale than, let's say, the tuna sandwich. So for certain very short and simple production processes, you can substitute direct valuation of goods for economic calculation. Calculation always uses cardinal numbers, that is, prices. So an example I might give you is the following. Let's say, let's go back to Robinson Crusoe. Say that Robinson Crusoe is on his island, and this is his value scale. Okay, he has 12 hours of labor. Let's say he works 12 hours. The other 12 hours he has to rest. Okay. So he divides his labor, and then this should be 3 here. Divides the 12 hours in 3-hour unit, or actually, all right, let's make it 16, make it easier, because I have 4 hours. So he can allocate his labor in 4-hour units among his most important wants. So for 4 hours, he gets a stick and knocks coconuts out of a tree, and he produces 4 coconuts. The next 4 hours, he fishes. Okay. In the third, he picks wild mushrooms so he can make the fish taste better and so on. And then for the 4th hour, if he's southern, he just fries the fish. Okay. And for the 4th hour, he picks a sack of berries every day, for the 4th unit of 4 hours, because he wants to make, let's say, wine. Okay, to have that with his dinner. Okay. Now he suddenly recognizes a new opportunity. He says, you know what? There's a rabbit. I see that there's rabbits on this island, and that I can hunt them, and in 4 hours I can catch a rabbit. The point is, does it cost him too much to devote 4 hours to catching the rabbit? Well, it's easy to compete. He doesn't need prices because he's directly producing for himself, and it's a very simple process. All he does is say to himself, well, if I take 4 hours out of the 12 hours and devote it to a rabbit, the cost of producing that rabbit is the fact that I have to forego the lowest valued good on my value scale, which is what? The berries for the wine. Okay? So he can directly make comparisons. Okay? Directly make comparisons. Now put Robinson Crusoe in charge of the United States economy. Okay? Or let's take a Star Trek example, which there was an episode in which a computer ran an entire planet, fed the people, made all the decisions about what to produce. I remember, and Kirk shuts it down for some reason because the people are getting sort of becoming less than human or some crap like that. So it's one of those typical. They're great, but they're so hokey. So anyway, let's say Robinson Crusoe and his family has access to all the resources in the United States, okay? And he has robots that will do all the work for him. And we have to assume that these resources are scarce, okay? And he can build himself castles. He can build himself, he had the robots build fast cars, airplanes, and so on. Would Robinson Crusoe be able to only get along with valuation in that case? No. The processes are so complicated. There are so many capital goods. There's an infinite way of combining all the different resources we now have in the United States. This is the precise problem. It's not just socialist planners. It's even a single person or family that tries to engage in very, very complex production processes. It's impossible without cardinal numbers. Okay? He'd be able to live, obviously, and be very wealthy, but he could not allocate all his resources rationally. All right? Okay, so Mises says that, or doesn't deny, that in a very simple economy, what he calls a household economy or a primitive tribe, they could more or less allocate resources in a way that serves their most urgent wants or their highest valued wants. But once you become bigger than that and the economy gets any more complex and you begin to have a lot of capital goods, then you need prices. And then you need more than one will. Okay, Mises actually talks about, there's a quote from him, the problem of socialism is the problem of one will acting. Because when you have one will, everything's owned by that person, so there's no exchange, there's no markets, and there's no prices. All right? Whether, again, it's Robinson Crusoe or whether it's a socialist central planning board, there's only one will acting. Even if it's a group of people, they're acting as in concert, as one. All right? So that was his basic argument against socialism, that there can be no economic calculation. So what he concluded was that socialist economy is literally impossible because it cannot calculate opportunity costs of production. Okay? In producing a car factory or in deciding to build a huge housing project, it does not know if it's using resources correctly. It does not know if the car factory should be built or the housing project. There's no way to know which is the more important use. And then when you begin to bring in the fact that they can use these resources to produce hundreds of thousands of things, millions of things, in many different technological ways, then it just becomes impossible. It's just simply planned chaos. Mises says that it's like being in the middle of a desert, trying to get to a point in the fastest way, but having absolutely no compass. Okay? So you're completely in the dark. Right? And that's why he called it planned chaos. So socialist planning is an oxymoron. Okay? Because you can't plan without prices. All right, now let me give you some real-world examples. There was a famine in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. It was interesting, travelers there were a number of books written about the Soviet Union by journalists, New York Times journalists, and a few others during that period. And they observed rusting tractors. There were tractors, but they were sitting in the field rusting. Yet there was all of this unharvested grain. At the same time, people were starving. And there were empty silos. There were silos to store the grain. Okay, why did they harvest the grain? Because there were no laborers. The laborers were producing steel or something else. Okay, there was no way to allocate those resources rationally. So, and there was not enough diesel fuel. So they were producing too much of certain things and not enough of other things, and they had a famine, in a country in which you have a tremendous amount of very arable, cultivatable land. Okay, where the Ukraine used to be called the breadbasket of Europe. In fact, that was one of the reasons why Hitler marched towards Russia. They wanted to take the Ukraine, okay, and incorporate it into the German economy, or at least make it sort of an imperial province of Germany to feed the German people. Okay, they had a system called gross output planning, and in this system, which substituted for prices, what happened was that the Central Planning Board, which was called Ghost Plan, okay, so there was a name for this board. Ghost Plan would come up with a plan in which they would tell each industry how much of each good to produce, okay? And then the industry minister of that particular industry, steel, automobiles, whatever it is, would then tell each factory manager how much their quota was. So this was called gross output planning. It was stated in terms of the units of the goods itself. There were no prices involved. It should be output here. And what were the problems? What would you think the problems would be with that? First of all, they gave each factory a target. Now, if the manager did not meet his target consistently, well, then he got a free trip to the Gulag in Siberia. Okay? If he met his target and exceeded it somewhat, he would get a bonus, a nice bonus. Okay? But the problem was, if he consistently produced more than the target, what would happen? They would raise the target. Say, aha, you can produce more. So it was really a system of mutual lying. What they would do is they would say, we can't produce more than 40 tons of nails, when they knew they could produce 60 tons. But since Ghost Plan, or the planner,